Football staff is finally complete, and a basketball season is suddenly interesting again. This is the Pick Six podcast with the Omaha World-Herald. I'm Evan Bland, Sam McEwen, Tom Chattel. Tom's back this week. We were back to the three-man weave after he was out in Lincoln last week. And guys, it feels like we're in February, but there's a lot of football to get to. We're talking some volleyball with the transition. And that basketball team, confounding as it is, suddenly kind of back on the bubble. It feels like we got kind of a potpourri of things going on here as the calendar turns into February. How are you guys doing?
We're good. I mean, Super Bowl Sunday's coming up. Always enjoy that. Always feels like once that's over, then it's all college basketball for that next month or two, and it's cool to have. Obviously, we cover more than Nebraska. It's cool to have almost every team with a factor, and Nebraska's in part of that. They have their own story, and I like that. And the Nebraska women have their own story, and so it's good when basketball is a factor in this state, and it's all the teams. It's not just the Creighton men, it's everybody. So I'm excited. I'm excited to see what happens, and then football's football. It never stops. Mm-hmm. And we got Mike Eckler back. You were there. You were there in 2008.
Yep.
You remember Mike
I remember
Eckler.
Mike Eckler, yep.
You remember him. Tom remembers Mike Eckler. Big vertical jump.
Yeah.
Probably 52 inches or whatever. So it's kind of interesting to have him back. I mean, I honestly have to say I didn't think he'd ever come back, but he's coming back under the best possible scenario where he's coming off 4 great years at Tennessee. So there's a lot to enjoy in early February.
Mm. Tom, basketball season. Is that your favorite sport this time of year, basketball? Missouri guy? I don't know. You always feel like hoops.
Well, what else is going on this time of year? I mean, this is basketball season. So, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
well,
absolutely.
Okay. Well, good. I'm glad to hear it.
Yeah,
well,
absolutely.
Let's start with some football, though. Matt Rhule. We finally heard from Matt Rhule. First time in a month. We heard from him at the Pinstripe Bowl at the end of December. And then he's been recruiting. He's been doing all kinds of different things. I think the headline item that came out of that was Matt Rhule not only saying Nebraska's highly unlikely to have a spring game, but the reason for it, or one of the reasons that he put out there, was tampering and how it doesn't exist anymore, and all it has become is essentially a showcase for other people to look at Nebraska's players and to offer them. I guess, what was your guys' take on that? Because I think the general idea was, well, it's a smaller roster, so maybe it's not feasible to have it, or you don't want to risk your investment in these guys now that rev sharing's beginning. What do you think of his assertion that one of the reasons Nebraska may not have a spring game or anything resembling one is because of tampering in the modern era?
Well, I think I didn't expect that answer. So I think we were all taken a little bit off guard. Like, we thought we were walking into that situation. It was going to be about Troy Dannon and what Troy Dannon said, earlier in the week, the same night John Cook retired. And so when we heard that, I think we were like, okay. And then we kind of followed up. I think one of the reporters followed up about the roster size, and he sort of agreed to that. But I think he wanted to make a point, and he was ready to make a point about that. And so from what I can gather, the injury thing is also part of the factor. The roster size is also part of the factor. Yes, they're going to have 126, but it's not 150. Those things do matter too. But the new element was the TV piece. And I think some of what he was trying to communicate in that point was, Wisconsin. He didn't say Wisconsin, but Wisconsin had this situation in December where basically a cornerback decided he didn't want to play there anymore and he wanted to go somewhere else, and Wisconsin didn't let him go to the transfer portal, but he left anyway, and he basically signed a deal at Miami. And so even if there isn't a portal opening period, you can leave anyway. Mm-hmm. Like you can go anyway, and he just doesn't want it on TV. And I think the injury piece is why they're not going to have a spring game that just isn't on TV. I think they don't want to risk losing a player or two, especially on that turf that they don't love. They dislike it so much they're going to replace it after the season, and then it'll last about 4 years, and then they're going to put grass in after they renovate the stadium. So they dislike the current turf so much that they're just going to have a 4-year lifespan on the new turf, and it usually lasts about 10 years. And so, I think there's multiple reasons for it, but the TV thing surprised everybody a little bit. And then, online, On3 runs with that, and they got these little graphic cards that they run. Josie does graphic cards for our site. On3 always puts one word at the bottom, and it says tamper.
Right.
And it's a picture of Matt Rhule scowling, and everybody ran with it. And it was interesting because I don't think he canceled the spring game. I didn't hear that. I heard we're probably not going to do it, but I don't think I heard cancel. And everybody was using the word cancel. And I was like, I don't know if that's the word I would use for it. So it was an interesting dialogue on Saturday and a little unexpected. And I did get some fan reaction. I'm sure Tom got some in his email too of people maybe not loving what they heard.
Yeah. Well, I think Troy Dannon said they weren't going to have one last week. So there's not going to be a spring game, according to the AD. So, I think there's got to be some truth to what Rhule said. I think coaches right now are, I think there's a lot of paranoia right now with the portal and schools and agents and handlers and everybody, contacting people, and it's the Wild West, and so I think the coaches are all paranoid, and they all, are not, they don't want to show anything. I've covered a million spring games. I've never seen anything that went to the fall. And as for people, now certainly coaches have a better football eye than I do. We all know that. But I mean, we've been watching spring games for years and said, "Well, that guy's going to be great next year. Look, he's the MVP of the spring game. He's going to be unbelievable next year." And you never hear from the guy again. So, I mean, we've all thought we've seen great players in the spring game who didn't do crap the next year. So, but coaches know more than we do. So, I find that interesting that from one televised spring game, you'd see players you had to have. I mean, it seems a little desperate to me. You know what I mean? Because we don't show anything in the spring game. They don't not necessarily running the same pass routes. They're not running the same plays. That one year, Amir Abdullah and Kenny Bell were running around in the hats. These giant, whatever hats they were called. They're shorts and they're running around and doing interviews, and so stars. We've stopped. Spring game has stopped being serious thing a long time ago. It used to be really serious. It used to be competitive, and you could say, okay, there's going to be a quarterback battle next year. It starts in the spring game. Well, those days have ended a long time ago. So, however they want to do it, that's fine with me. I don't think the spring game is, I heard from some people that were like, well, this was the only chance I had to take my kids when we could afford it. And I said, well, you could still, I said, if they do it right, they come up with a 2 or 3 day Husker Fest where you put volleyball in there. Imagine football and volleyball together. That's what Troy Dannon was saying. That'll be unbelievable. That'll be so much better than some spring game that had absolutely nothing to do with the fall. Because there's 29 practices in August. The spring game it's number 15 in the spring. So you go 29 after that are more meaningful than the 15 in the spring. So it's entertainment. It's a reason for people to go to the stadium and buy a Runza and wear red and act like it's a spring game. But what if you had 2 or 3 days of stuff, alumni stuff, volleyball, football stuff, and people would actually spend the night in hotels and go to restaurants and bars and have this, like the Chicago Cubs Fest or the Trekkies, the Star Trekkies, or get together in San Diego or
Husker Comic-Con.
Yeah, Husker Comic-Con, something like that. That'd be unbelievable. So, and of course you tie in NIL with it. Of course, everything is now about money and NIL, but people would build their schedules around that. So there's a lot of things to do. spring game goes away, ain't gonna bother me.
Yeah, I think that's the 2014 game Tom's referencing is the same one where Bo Pelini had the cat. And he thrust
Held
the
it up,
cat up.
Simba style, yeah.
Had Bo stayed the head coach, I actually think you would have seen more of that element go for the spring games going forward. I think one of the reasons why it stayed alive at Nebraska as well as it has is because we keep getting new coaches. And so, like, part of what the spring game turned into is go see Mike Riley's team for the first time. Go see Scott Frost's team for the first time. Go see Matt Rhule's team for the first time. It almost became like a debut. And when we went to Rules a couple years ago, I remember turning to you and being like, this is a really long. Because remember, they ran. I mean, that thing was like 2.5 hours long.
Yep.
I'm like, this is football for sure, but it was very long and kind of boring. And I would personally, as a journalist, welcome an alteration to the schedule. Like, if you went to a Husker weekend, the volleyball reporter would go and do the volleyball part. We come in, we do the football part. Like, yeah, I think that would be a way of recouping the money and giving fans an experience that maybe they don't get right now. Because under Matt Rhule, it has been a lot of football.
Right.
And you got to really like football because it's like a lot of running plays and like really smashing into people with players who aren't going to play. So we'll see what they do in the spring. I thought the TV comment was made for a reason, though. Like, he's trying to call attention to a frustration that he has within the sport that there's just no rules. And Matt Rhule rarely does things without, like, really thinking about it. So that statement was not just about the spring game, but about the overall culture in athletics where, like, players can just leave and go wherever they want and teams can tamper and there's no accountability.
Kind of reminds me of of positive things that came out of the pandemic. Like you see a rise in virtual meetings and Zoom or food orders to go. This kind of feels like it could be in that vein where there's so much change going on that maybe people aren't in love with, but I think you could do something really cool with that weekend. Kind of like Tom's talking about, some kind of a Husker Fest, or you could have a skills competition or an open practice or some kind of a celebrity softball game with volleyball and football players. Like, there are way too many creative people in that athletic department to not leverage the brand into some sort of a fundraiser, I would think. I mean, there's got to be just no shortage of possibilities.
I agree for sure.